everybody, and welcome back to the channel for the second of my first quarter wrap-up style videos. Today I am talking about some of the best ofs from the first reading for the first quarter of the reading year, which would be the books that I read from January through to March. This is not a list of like my favorite books of the year, so not like if I had to rank all of the books. I think in the last video I said that I had read 32 books this year, and if I had to rank like the top 6 books out of those 32, it's not necessarily the books on this list. What I want to talk about is some honorable mentions for like certain types of books that I have read. So I have 6 specific recommendations pulled from the books that I read in the first quarter of the year. And the very first one that I'm going to go with is a best of, and that is the best novella that I read in 2023. And actually, if I had to say, this is probably the best novella that I have ever read in my entire life, and that is the novella Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I read this in January. It was one of the assigned books from the TBR that Alan from the Library of Alexandria assigned me at the beginning of the year, and I think he put it on there A, because he likes it, and B, because he had given me like some chunkier books and so wanted to put something shorter on the list. But I was thrilled to have read this. For anyone who has never read Ogres or hasn't heard about me talk about it, it is a novella told in the second person, and it is a novella that keeps you constantly on your feet. Adrian Tchaikovsky, I think, I'm not even going to say it because I say it too often, but I am very impressed by Adrian Tchaikovsky's range. I think that he's a very talented author. He does a lot of good stuff with very different tropes, very different styles, very different characters. And Ogres, I think, is one of the best things that I have read by him so far. It is a very fast-paced, very intriguing novella. If you don't mind the style, because like I said, it is written in second person, if you can adapt to that fairly well, I think that you will find it overall a very enjoyable experience. It's kind of a mashup between sci-fi and fantasy. It really toes that line. So if you're looking for books that blend tropes and ideas from both of those very connected genres, then I think Ogres would be an excellent choice. If you're looking for something small to break up your TBR, a novella is always a great option to throw on, and Ogres is truly one of the best ones that I have ever read. I gave it 5 stars when I read it back in January, and I was so pleased with it. I certainly will reread it one day, and it is one that I think I'll continue to recommend over and over and over again. The second book that ended up on here is also from that list of recommendations by Alan, and it was the best morally gray character that I have read this year, and that character is Basso from the book The Folding Knife by K.J. Parker. So Alan, again, over at the Library of Alexandria, is a huge K.J. Parker stan. He is kind of like proclaiming the word of Parker to anybody who will listen. He loves all of the things that he's read by him so far, and he is making his way pretty quickly through K.J. Parker's bibliography. This was my first work by K.J. Parker, and ever since I heard Alan talk about him and his style and the kinds of things that he writes about, I knew that I wanted to give his books a try, and I think that this was a really good place to start. For anyone who has not read any K.J. Parker, he has a fair number of novellas, he has some standalone novels, The Folding Knife is one of these, and then he also has some series. And I always think that like a nice, full, novel-length standalone is a great place to start with any author to kind of dip your toe in and see if you enjoy their style. And The Folding Knife for me was a phenomenal book. It was an exquisite book. I do not think that this book could have been written in any other way. I don't think there was anything lacking or missing or that I would change. It was, for what K.J. Parker was trying to accomplish, perfect in my eyes. That doesn't mean that I think it is a perfect book or that I even think a perfect book exists, but for what he was trying to create, I think that he did a perfect job at executing that. And this is a book that will certainly not appeal to everyone. In fact, after I recommended it in January, I had a bunch of people be like, yeah, I started that and it was really boring and I DNF'd it. I was like, fair enough. It is not going to be a book that is for everyone. It is first and foremost a character study of our main character, Basso. And Basso is like essentially a high functioning sociopath. He has very little empathy for others. He does have empathy and he does have people that he cares for. The people that he cares for are also not great people, which makes it very frustrating as you read the book. But he is the kind of person who will do anything at all to get what he wants or to do what he feels must be done. He's very pragmatic. He's very smart. And I know that Alan loves this as well, which is I think what endeared us both to this book and this character. I love it when characters who are supposed to be smart are actually smart on the page. And Basso is an enormously intelligent protagonist, and that makes him so much fun to read about. There are a lot of details in this book because Basso is a banker and he runs a bank, works for a bank. And so there's a lot of details about the economy, about decisions that he's going to make, how that will impact the kingdom that he lives in. And for some people, that is in fact going to be very boring. So if you start this book and you take this recommendation and you think, I'm going to read this, and you don't like it, that's okay. I'm not going to be upset. I acknowledge that this is not going to be the book for everyone. I was enthralled the entire time. Basso was just such a well-realized character who does the worst things, which sometimes end up having excellent results. They have very positive results for the people or the populace, but not done at all for the right reasons. Or sometimes it's wrong things for the right reasons, or things that end up being good but for the wrong reasons. He stumbles into doing the right thing sometimes. It's really, really fascinating. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. And I really want to read more by KJ Parker. I do have one book by him on my physical TBR, so I'm certainly going to read that this year. But I think I'm also going to try to pick up some of his novellas just because I really enjoyed his style. I thought that his writing was incredibly intelligent, very compelling, and I really would like to try more of it. But for best morally gray character, Basso absolutely takes the cake. I can't imagine that anybody else is going to usurp him this year. I'm sure he'll still be in that spot at the end of the year. The third recommendation that I wanted to give was for best series finale. So I'm trying to finish off some of the open-ended series that I have this year. And I started off with a bang. I finished the first Law trilogy, and specifically The Age of Madness, which is the second trilogy in this series after the standalones. And it was so good. I absolutely understand why everybody, the year that The Wisdom of Crowds came out, why everybody had that on their best book of the year list. It is phenomenal. It is a wonderful conclusion. It satisfies you in terms of what has been set up during the Age of Madness, but also kind of tugs on your heartstrings from books that are standalones, from books that take place in the original trilogy. It's just really good. There is a sense of closure that's there. There is a sense of dramatic irony on Joe Abercrombie's part. Just that mixing of darkness with humor continues right to the final pages of the story. I loved some of the new characters that he had in here. I hated, but in a good way, just loathed because of the way that he put them together, some of the characters in this series. And it was so good. If The Wisdom of Crowds doesn't end up as one of my favorite books of the year, then I don't even know what I'm going to be reading for the next 9 months, because it is phenomenal. Absolute 5 stars. Loved it, loved it, loved it. If you have been hesitant on the first Law, or you didn't love the first couple of books, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if you like these ones anymore, but I loved them. They are excellent. I wish that Joe Abercrombie had 500 books that he had written, that I could just turn my reading year into the year of Joe Abercrombie, but unfortunately not. I'll have to make do with other things, but just know that I really, really loved the end of this series. Number 4, best palette cleanser. So I talked about this one relatively recently. If you watched my most recent wrap up, then this is going to sound a little bit repetitive, and I am sorry. But a book that I read this year that I think would make a fantastic palette cleanser is Dogs of War by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And I actually don't mind talking about this a little bit because I never hear anybody talk about it. Adrian Tchaikovsky is one of those authors, one of those stealth authors, where you hear about some of his books fairly often. Everybody or many people have heard of Children of Time. And, there are some books that, Guns of the Dawn, had its time going around BookTube, and you heard about that. I had not heard of Dogs of War until this year, and it's so much fun. I mean, I say fun, it's actually really sad too, but it's a really good time adventure-wise. It just has some like really strong emotional beats to it as well. It is a story about these biological weapons called bioforms, which are biologically enhanced animals who fight for humans. So they were designed by and fight for human armies. And we follow in this first book, Dogs of War, one of the canine bioforms. And you see the story from his perspective, and Adrian Tchaikovsky does an amazing job of getting inside the head of a dog. You know that this is an intelligent creature. You know that this is a creature that has higher thinking and is able to rationalize and recognize right from wrong, but is also very much a dog. And it feels like that. And I'm a big dog person, especially like in books, and I love reading about animals. And so it definitely makes things hit a little bit harder. And this book was so emotional, but really exciting. It's very short. I think it's under 300 pages in total. And it's just a really easy one to throw on your TBR. I think if you're looking to read something by Tchaikovsky, some of his books can be pretty chunky. And I think this is a good one to at least give a try. It does showcase some of the things he's really good at, which is, I think, showing you the perspective of non-human creatures, of trying to help you see the world in a bit of an alternate way, broaden your horizons a little bit. And then there's also, like I said, some really important moral questions, there's a lot of complexity to the emotional beats of the story. So I thought it was excellent. This is actually a duology, and I am going to be reading the second book sometime this year. So definitely would recommend this one if you're looking for a book to kind of slot in between some of those chunkier fantasy books. After that, number 5 is the best mental health rep. So I am going to be putting together a video at some point in the near future about mental health representation in fantasy books, but I read one again in March, so like fairly recently, that I thought did an excellent job of this, and that is the book Tess of the Road by Rachel Hartman. So this is a YA fantasy book, but I think it genuinely crosses over between YA and adult. The main character is, I think, 16, and I said this in my wrap-up as well. I don't remember if she's 16 or 17, but she's at the age of adulthood in this fantasy world. Like, this is the age that they go out into society, that they can get married. Like, this is their age of, crossing over from childhood to adulthood. So I think that it's certainly a coming of age or a young adult story, but more emphasis on the adult type themes. Like, this is not a young adult book that I feel like would appeal to a 12 or a 13-year-old. This is someone that I think who wants to transition into adult fantasy or has been reading YA for a while would probably really enjoy Tess of the Road. It is a very heavy book, and Rachel Hartman tackles a lot of really complex issues like sexual assault, trauma, familial abuse, generational trauma, the difficulty of reconciling your religious beliefs with some of the harsher kind of punitive viewpoints that come from that religion, and how you manage to live with both of those things at the same time. It is about self-discovery and healing and recovery and growth, and it's very painful. And I think that one thing that you don't see a lot in literature, and that doesn't get talked about a lot when we talk about recovery and growth and moving along from trauma, is that oftentimes mental illness can be romanticized. And I don't mean that in it can be romanticized in many different ways, but I think a very common way that this happens is that people, now that there is more recognition for mental health issues, which I think is only a good thing, people focus on, and especially in genre fiction, where this is usually like a background element to a character's personality, is that they will really focus on a diagnosis, and they will really focus on the struggle and the challenge and the growth and moving forward. And there'll be a lot of sadness, and there'll be a lot of like opening up, and there'll be a lot of difficult and emotional and heavy-hitting moments. But what you don't see covered a lot, and what gets covered in Tess of the Road, and what I see a lot in my work, is the really difficult part of moving forward that includes like anger and irritability and aggression and self-loathing and bitterness, and all of those feelings that are also a really natural part of moving on from trauma, of living with anxiety, of living with depression. It's not just sadness. That's not the only way that these things manifest, but anger is something that we as a society are not incredibly comfortable with, and it's not something that we often reconcile with characters that we want to see as good. And anger is something that I see from a lot of patients in real life, and something that I like to see reflected in stories that tackle mental health issues, because it is a normal, natural part of the process. And do people need to find healthy ways to manage and live through their anger? Yes. But is it reasonable to expect someone who has lived through incredibly traumatic events to never feel angry? No. But I feel like that's part of the conversation that gets lost when we make mental illness part of the conversation in terms of books or television or those types of things. We gloss over those like more difficult, aggressive, I want to say aggressive, like emotionally aggressive. I don't mean aggressive as in like hurting people, because that's a really harmful stereotype in terms of mental health, is that they are more aggressive than the general population, which has just been shown to be not true. But those more explosive, I guess, emotions that can come along with trauma. Explosive is definitely a better word. And that is something that Tess of the Road shows. And it's really painful to read sometimes, because Tess acts in ways toward her family that are meant to push them away, because she doesn't feel that either she deserves them or she wants them or she needs them. And often anger is a vehicle by which people will do that. And it was just refreshing to see it in the story and to watch how Tess has to come to terms with that and try to change that and live with it and recognize why she feels that way. And I don't see that in a lot of books, and I don't see that recognized a lot as something that happens. But certainly for people that I talk to, people that I see, people that I treat, it is a huge part of what is going on. Anger is, this is like, it's getting into something that I am personally very passionate about. I did an entire like grand rounds presentation on anger as a psychiatric symptom once, because it's very poorly understood even by psychiatrists. It can lead to certain diagnoses or certain labels, and it makes up part of the diagnostic criteria for so many illnesses, and it manifests in different ways for different reasons all the time. And it's something that doesn't show up a lot in books. So this is great mental health representation, but it is told from the perspective of a very angry, very lost, very hurt teenage girl. So you need to know that when you go in. If that's not the kind of perspective you like to read from, then this is not the kind of book that you're going to enjoy. But I loved it. I thought that it was excellently done, and this one's a duology as well. I cannot wait to read the second book in this series. And then at the very end, like shifting gears from that very intense recommendation that I just gave, is my best audiobook of the year. And I cheated and put 2 here, but they are going to be A Natural History of Dragons, which is narrated by Kate Redding, and The Phantom Tollbooth, which was one of the Audible exclusives that was narrated by Rainn, and I wrote it down, Wilson. I always get that name wrong, but it's Dwight from The Office. So he narrated The Phantom Tollbooth, did a fantastic job. All of the Audible exclusive audiobooks that have been read by celebrities that I have read so far, which include Jane Eyre, The Phantom Tollbooth, Anne of Green Gables. I feel like there was another one. There was Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Like, all of the audiobook production has been excellent. Like the quality, the way that these books have been narrated, all excellent, excellent, excellent. Anne of Green Gables was probably my favorite, which was Rachel McAdams, but The Phantom Tollbooth was also excellent. There's a very short cameo as well by one of Rainn Wilson's children who does the voice for a child character at one point in the book, which was also really good. But it was just a great job. The Phantom Tollbooth, this is the first time that I had ever read/listened to it, and it was delightful. I got my daughter to listen to it. It is one that I will definitely come back to. Absolutely recommend, like if you're going on a family road trip and you need a book to listen to, you have kids, you want to listen to something with them, this is the perfect choice. It is excellent. I really, really enjoyed it, both in terms of content of the book, but also in terms of the audiobook experience. And of course, I have talked about A Natural History of Dragons so many times, and I really, really, really love it. The audiobook narration here is phenomenal. Kate Redding, I think, is one of the Wheel of Time audiobook narrators. Like, I think that's what she's famous for, but I haven't listened to the Wheel of Time on audio. But she has the perfect voice for this series. She does such a great job as Lady Trent, who is an older woman kind of reflecting back on her life. And her voice, her demeanor, the way that she delivers the lines is just perfect for this series. So absolutely phenomenal audiobook experience as well. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in the series to pick it up on audio. But that's it. Those are my recommendations for the first quarter of 2023. These are some of my favorite books, some of my favorite characters, some of the best experiences that I have had this year. If there are any books that were kind of stand out for you in the first 3 months of the year, I would love to hear about them. And I will see you with another video soon. Bye.